The Willwoods community invites married couples to break away from their busy schedules and spend quality time rejuvenating and enriching your relationship on a weekend married couples retreat. Held at the beautiful St. Joseph Abbey in Covington, you and your spouse will spend time growing closer in your marriage through inspiring talks, private couple time, personal alone time, reconciliation, Eucharistic adoration, and the celebration of the Mass. To register for your getaway, go to faithandmarriage.org.
Welcome to another episode of Faith in Marriage today. My name is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and just grateful to have you joining us for another, hopefully, amazing episode. Well, as you can see in today's episode, we are again partnering with the Archdiocese of New Orleans and the Men's Conference Ministry and doing another episode that we're going to tackle another one of these episodes that the Men's Conference has put on. This again, just recapping, this year has been a year, instead of doing a full Men's Conference, which initially was slated in the spring, we were doing series quarterly episodes called Walking with St. Joseph. And so now we've been able to do 2 of these episodes, all of which are available at nolacatholicmen.org. We encourage you to please check those videos out. You're going to be blessed and encouraged in your own spiritual life and in just understanding deeper what the church is teaching us with regards to masculine spirituality. So we're going to break apart the second episode today. And so joining me on the show, I'm so grateful to have again back with us is Father Andrew Gutierrez, the MC of this whole beautiful project. You've seen his gorgeous face on every one of these episodes. And so happy to have him with us, as well as MCing the conference as a whole. And also Chris O'Neill, the director of the Office of Marriage and Family Life. Just truly grateful to have both of you guys here with us today.
Thanks, Mario.
Yeah.
It's so great. It's always great to do this. So
yeah, it is. It's awesome. So we're going to have a great time. All right, so let's get into the first one. Well, Chris, you did a wonderful job leading us in the second. What are you talking about? Hope so. Come on, man. Well, the editing was great. Okay, so you can say that. The editing was excellent. You know, they cut you. They kept it perfect.
Yeah.
Talking about St. Joseph and the virtues, as well as in particularly the virtue of chastity.
Yeah.
And so just give us a quick bullet points for those who didn't watch the video. What did you mean when you talked about St. Joseph and chastity? And what was why that particular virtue?
Yeah, so I was very nervous putting that together. So and I feel like I have my say. So I'm actually really interested to see how you guys responded to it.
But, we'll have plenty of time to respond. Don't worry about it.
Just in a nutshell, in the divine praises that we say after adoration, blessed be God, blessed be His holy name. There's this line that says, "Blessed be Saint Joseph, Mary's most chaste spouse," and it was interesting to me to think about the chastity of Joseph is the thing that we praise God for, not that he's the terror of demons or that he's the patron of the church or that he's the adopted father of Jesus or anything. It's always his chastity, right? And to me that just seemed like there's something that the church is trying to tell us there about Saint Joseph that goes to the heart of what we normally think and challenges what we normally think about things about chastity and that kind of stuff. Normally we think chastity is just mostly about not doing things that we shouldn't do.
That's right. That's right.
Don't act on your desires in unhealthy ways or something like that. And it's a very negative way. And it's like, is that the right way to think about St. Joseph? Like, St. Joseph's a great guy because he just didn't do bad things? Well, no. I mean, we think of Joseph as his freedom and his courage and his service and just like all of these beautiful virtues. And how does chastity play in that? So that's what I was thinking about, and so I was thinking through that and thinking through what the church teaches us about chastity. And it's interesting that in the Catechism, chastity is not the control of desires or something like that. It's described as the integration of our desires, our ability to be whole and our ability to see the beauty and goodness of the other person. Jesus in the negative says the person who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery. And that's also a clue. The positive side, that means chastity means how we look. Like, how we look at another person, what do we see when we see them? It's not about not looking, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's about looking at them in the right way.
So when we think of St. Joseph then as husband of Mary and most chaste spouse, we're saying it's not just that he didn't have relations with her or he didn't lust over her. That's a piece of it. But rather it's that he reverenced her with the fullness of what she deserved.
I mean, it wasn't like they were sitting around in the house together. He's just not looking at her. Well, that's not what, that's not the right to think of there.
I think there can be sometimes a view of the Holy Family as this space where Mary's over here with the child Jesus, and then Joseph's doing his thing, and he has this intimate moment sometimes where he holds Jesus or teaches him carpentry, but that Mary and Joseph didn't have intimacy within themselves because we think of chastity as a way in which maybe to control my desire for intimacy rather than the mode by which to be intimate. And oddly enough, this morning when I celebrated Mass on my own, because I didn't have a Mass at the parish, I did a Mass to St. Joseph, and I didn't plan that because of this. I just woke up this morning, I said I didn't want to do the order.
If you would have planned it for our episode. Thank you.
The Lord planned
Father
it.
Andrew's praying for you guys. This is great.
The Lord planned it. I just didn't want to do an ordinary Mass. So anyway, for all the prayers, even in the Mass, votive Mass for St. Joseph, it highlights the fact that he's the spouse of Mary. So what's essential to his being in that vocation is this chastity that allows him to be pure of heart, to see God, just like the Beatitude says, right? Which is what you're highlighting.
That's right. I mean, we tend to, that's a really good way to think about it. We confuse intimacy and sexual expression all the time in our culture. We if they weren't sexually active or something, then they're not intimate. It's like, no, there's a much richer reality to the intimacy that Joseph has with Mary, the intimacy that we have with our spouses, and it's a much bigger, richer, more beautiful thing. And you have to act with integrity, and you have to act with care in order to foster that rich intimacy. And so it's a mistake to think that Joseph and Mary weren't intimately related,
But I think it's good in terms of the virtue of chastity. But then even just when we're talking about, you're saying in the Mass, what's striking me now is just thinking about like the fact that they were spouses.
Yeah.
And that somehow being a spouse in today's day and age isn't good enough of an identity, Yeah. That somehow it's not high enough to just be a husband or to just be a wife, that you have to be all these other things. And while certainly we do have another feast day for St. Joseph the Worker that we acknowledge, of course, work and the importance that's there, but that the Church acknowledges that even more so before what we do, it's our identity in relationship that is the most important thing. And that sometimes just being a good husband or just being a good wife is enough to get you to heaven.
Yeah. Well, that's the vocation.
Yes.
Right. The vocation is to be a husband and to be a wife. I mean, that's the vocational choice. And then the work that we do, the friends that we have, the way we go about living in the life, those are expressions of that vocation, but that's not the vocation. If I have a job at one point, I'm supporting and caring for my wife and my family. I change my job, or my career changes. Who I am and what I'm called to do in the world hasn't fundamentally changed, because I'm still the spouse of my wife. I'm still the father of my children, and that's still the vocation that I'm in. I haven't changed my vocation, and so putting those things in correct order, it's a good way to think of St. Joseph, is that he put his life was in the correct order, so that he was the spouse of Mary and he was a carpenter, but then God asked him to do something different.
Right.
But what God asked him to do was maybe a different expression of the same thing he had always called him to do, which was to love his wife and to not be afraid to take Mary into his home. And so now that means that I have to go to Egypt, or now that means I have to, do something different. Right. But the vocation hadn't changed, and there's an integrity to what God has called him through all the way through.
Yeah. Well, Father Andrew, I've got a question for you. So going back into the chastity piece, obviously in your work with young people, youth ministry, everything you have going on in the parish, if you're listening to a young adult, some young adults watching this, or a young person is listening to this, and they're like, okay, that's great and all, and that's dandy in terms of chastity being kind of a full expression of intimacy, a full expression of love, a full expression of marriage, beautiful, yes, but man, I'm just struggling. I'm just struggling averting my eyes. I'm struggling with putting limits on what I watch online. I'm struggling with conversations or things that I'm happening. So while that's all lofty, that's not meeting me where I'm at now. Right. What would you say to that person?
I think we're doing a better job with our high school students now or youth, I do think when I'm 28, when my generation was going through high school, there was a little bit of too much of the flowery. What we just talked about was the emphasis.
Yes.
And it's important that we have that as its proper place. But what was almost downcasted is if there's a struggle, if there's a battle, there's something really wrong. And then it makes it a disconnect to not really believe that this is possible, this kind of life-giving virtue of chastity and this beauty of chastity. One, it's not possible, or I'm just extremely discouraged with the battle.
Right.
And the amount of people, both men and women, that come into the confessional shamed and discouraged. Discouraged. I think the most sad part of my heart is when I see the discouragement that maybe this isn't going to be possible. And so what happens is they forget, or they maybe don't even understand, that part of the process of growing in freedom and growing in chastity is itself sanctifying.
Yes.
And is itself part of the Lord's process.
Yes.
That we're not projects. That's huge. We're not projects that just need to become pure or free from sin or fixed or laid out in a particular way. Like, this is the cookie cutter model of chastity and you got to live it out. And if you're not living it out like this, there's a problem.
Right.
That all needs to break because it takes away the relationship that we do have with Jesus. And so, for example, very common experience of a boyfriend and a girlfriend that are sexually active in their relationship, and they desire to not be, but they keep coming to the confessional saying, we want to not, but we're having this longing for each other that's good. And I think oftentimes what I suggest to them from the get-go, there's the practicality of not putting yourself in a near occasion of sin, all those things. But I think what ties to this conversation is what I say to them is, why do you want your relationship to be pure? Not just because I don't want to sin or I don't want it to be impure. And I don't really know the answer for that for them. This is something that I want you to reflect on, and then I want y'all to have a conversation about, is what I suggested. Why do you want your relationship to be holy? Why do you want it to be chaste? Why do you want it to be pure in a positive sense? So that way, when you have these desires, we can direct them well.
Yes.
Part of it is, okay, what is going on inside of me, and then where do I go with that desire?
Right. So in maintaining a balance of having the vision and also then kind of some practical things you talked about, but maintaining you have an appropriate motivation. You know, when you're thinking about starting an exercise routine or losing weight or whatever it is, when those things are just for the sake of it, like, that's not enough of a motivation to say, like, no, I want to lose weight because, you know, I had a good friend of mine who lost a lot of weight because he felt that he was falling behind with regards to his relationships with his kids. As his kids were getting older and they were getting more active, he wasn't able to stay as active with them. So he's like, I need to lose weight so that I can be involved in my kids' lives. Same as you were saying. Why is it that you want to be pure? Is it just because that's what the church teaches? Or is it because that's a value that you hold near and dear with yourself? And to be able to then say, all right, now I know what I'm being motivated by, so that when these desires do emerge, I have something that I can do with them, rather than just kind of white knuckling it.
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was kind of hoping for. I mean, I wanted to talk about, you know, what that end was, and to reimagine Joseph as a man who was free, a man who was who was this man of virtue, not just someone who was in control.
Yes.
You know, that was the one piece, and then also to say that the relationship that Joseph had with Mary wasn't some kind of weird exception, but something that we're all being called to, and then to understand that getting there is not easy, and getting there is a process. It's like you have to. There's a task that we're engaged in to integrate these desires and make them whole. And I think, just like what you're saying, if you try to be chaste because that's what you're supposed to do, and it's just not enough, right?
It's not enough.
But if you say, we want to build this much more rich intimacy, then it's worth the struggle, right? And then we also put into context, and this is something that I hope we can do, put into context the failures. Like, why are we surprised that we occasionally fail in this area? It's not easy to do. Right. And so, you know, it's not like the whole thing is ruined or the whole project is ruined just because of a failure.
That's right.
It means, okay, that's the time to learn, like, something, maybe I need to do something different, or maybe I need to find another way. But it doesn't, like, ruin the whole project. Sometimes people, you know, fail and then they throw their hands up and say, well, then forget it. And that's a tremendous error.
And that's awful, because we don't want to perpetuate the sense that, only you have to be perfect in terms of maintaining this relationship. And we said earlier,
people think that.
It's a struggle. I know people
I will
do.
not get married until I fix this
I know,
problem.
and we can't.
That is a lie.
It's a lie.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
not how
lie,
it works.
because it's the journey of the vocation that's going to make you a saint, be it marriage or priesthood or anything. So, so let's transition though here first to the second part. Obviously we could talk about chastity and virtue beautifully, and it could tie into the second segment. But the second piece of the video that you guys had so beautifully putting together talked about the importance of men's groups, and it highlighted one group in particular, this kind of informal group that just kind of emerged of guys. I speak Spanish, but I'll make sure I'm going to get this right. It's the Sociedad de Hombres Pecadores, the Society of Sinful Men, that this informal group kind of came together. So I guess tying into the conversation with chastity, certainly, but just in its own right, Father Andrew, what have you seen as the importance of men's groups in our walk of faith?
Sure. So my exposure has been both in the seminary with my brother priest, seeing the importance of good, solid male friendships there. And then in my experience of ministry in the parish, I've been a part of an Exodus 90 group, which is a small group of 4 guys going intense with prayer and with penitential practices. I've also been, Franciscan came out with this discipleship quad. It's actually a 43-week commitment. Exhausting and beautiful. But I've done that with 3 young adult men, and then I've done an Exodus Light for 30 days with high school men as well. I think what I see is, you talk about the practicality of chastity and the practicality of growing in virtue. This becomes a staple where guys come back together. This is what I've seen across the board with all 3 demographics as well as myself. It keeps me in check. Not every time we meet is it like my mind's getting blown.
Right.
But what happens is certain things happen in our lives, or certain struggles or virtues even start to blossom, and then it becomes a point of connection where we process that together, we pray together, we remind each other what the Lord has said in the Gospels, so that it can then inform the way in which we go back into our vocations.
That's right.
Whatever the state of life
Whatever
is.
it is. That's right.
Here in perspective of what it means to be a good father, being in this midst of discernment, or just having a kid and being able to relate what these kind of struggles are of just transition in life, and then high school kids that are figuring out, who am I?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Chris, why don't you tell us, what was the intention then to focus on men's groups, and in particularly this group in particular?
Yeah, so I think the first thing and it actually ties into what we were just talking about before, is that the spiritual life has a cumulative effect.
Right.
It builds on. It's a building up, and it takes time. And that building up means it takes time. You don't come out of the chute and you got it. You read the Gospels, you realize, oh, Jesus is Lord, and I have a conversion, and everything's done. It's not how it works. It's a gradual process. And one of the guys in the video talked about how it makes sense to us financially that we have our 401k plan that we contribute to little by little, because we know it's a cumulative thing. Well, let's have a 401s plan. Let's have this. It's quirky,
true.
but it's the idea that
makes sense.
you've got to keep contributing a little by little by little and have it build up. And the men's group permits that. It's just a concrete way to keep us on track. It's sort of like your automatic payment into your savings account or something like that. It's a way of keeping that moving forward, and that's been our focus for the whole of this year of the men's conference, is to lean on those small groups. This group in particular, they had watched the first video, and the guy emailed me and goes, well, that's kind of interesting, because that's sort of like what we do.
Yeah.
And so we were in conversations with them. And what was so interesting about them was, they went through, it was really like a 4-year process of just getting together, just saying to each other regularly, well, what else can we do? And what should we do next? At first they just had breakfast every week for a year. And then the second year, they said, well, maybe we should read books. And so then they started reading books. And they did that for a year. And then the next year, they said, well, maybe we should, every time, each of us take a topic and talk about it. And they did that for a year. And little by little, they were constantly going back to this place of this is good. We enjoyed being together. We're growing in our faith. What should we do next? What more can we do? What else can we do? And so through that process of discernment, their group grew, not in terms of numbers. It didn't become 10 and 20 and 50 or something. Right. It was the same 4 or 5 guys, but it grew in depth and eventually led them to doing really incredible work in their parish. The mission that they helped sponsor, the work they were helping out with Loyola, it ended up bearing fruit in contributions to the life of the church, which couldn't have come about any other way. And so I thought that they're a really good example of how that cumulative effect of attending to our spiritual life takes it. It doesn't necessarily have to go along a particularly well-defined path or program. It's just a matter of discernment. And not that, doing like an Exodus 90 or doing a That Man Is You or Crossing the Law, having a program like that can help. Sure. But that's not the fundamental point. It's not the program that does it. It's the continual pursuit of holiness in fraternity that kind of does the trick.
And I think what I appreciate about this conversation, the way it's been presented throughout the whole men's conference, whether it was last year's or even this year with the Walking in St. Joseph videos, is that it is more about the spiritual renewal. That's what's most important. Yeah. Recently I got invited to join a men's group, and the guy prefaced it by being like, yeah, we get together on Sundays and we drink beers and we have a fun time. And I was like, while that may be where people are and that may be what he needs in his life right now, I know for myself, though, I'm not going to sacrifice my Sunday afternoon in quality time with my wife and kids to just go drink beer with some guys.
Right.
Now, I'm really not saying this.
There's a time and a place for that.
Because there might be a time where I need that type of fellowship. Right now, I don't need that type of fellowship because I do have friends and opportunities like this where we get to hang out.
You drink plenty of beer already.
And I drink plenty of beer. So that too. but the sense that like there has to be something more substantial to the invitation, at least for me where I am in my life.
Right. Well, because it's a sacrifice.
Correct.
I mean, if you're doing this every week or every other week, it is a sacrifice to wake up early or to take time away from something else. Right. So it's got to be worth it.
It's got to be worth it.
And it's got to be real. It's got to be vulnerable. And in my opinion, there's got to be some scripture where the Word of God is being able to then apply to our lives in some capacity. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but it's got to be something.
So I've actually never been part of a formal men's group. I shouldn't say never. I had a little bit in Tallahassee. We did men's retreats, and we had some groups that kind of met from that. But over the last 10 years, more or less, I have really good friends, and my really good friends call me out when they need to. And we meet regularly, and we talk regularly, and we're very open with one another. So, but I know that's my circumstance. I know that's not everybody's circumstances. Again, if somebody is listening to this and they're saying, man, this is great, how do I get plugged into a men's group locally, or how do I start one that becomes more edifying? Where do people begin? What are resources, Chris?
Yeah, so, there are resources out there, which I'll tell you in a minute, but the first thing is just pay attention to what's right in front of you. You have friends. Go have breakfast. Like you can do that.
You can do that.
Like you can do that, right? And then make a decision that we're going to talk about higher order things. We're going to talk about the things of God. We're going to talk about our spiritual life. And then let that be what the conversation's about. And, you stray off. I mean, they talked about how they fumbled around and started talking about politics too much or whatever. But, it's okay, and you come back and like, this is what it's about. And it's not any more complicated than that, right? Now, there are a lot of men's groups all around the diocese. It's been really growing. You can go to nolacatholicmen.com, and there's a section there called Find a Men's Group, and it has a listing of several of the groups. It's not all of them. It's not. And if you're a men's group and you're not on the list, let us know so we can put you on the list. But you can find, parishes near you that are that have something going on. You can get plugged in. Contact information's there, or whatever. If you're a guy that's, maybe there's nothing going on in your parish, or you don't want to be part of that group, or whatever, or you just kind of feel like, we should be doing something, then there's another section on the website at nolacatholicmen.com that says about men's groups, and there's some information there about what a men's group is, what does it look like, a few little resources about where to get started. We talked about how the Sociedad didn't start with any kind of program, but there are really good programs out there that kind of lay out day one, this is what you talk about, day two, this is what you talk about, and those can be really helpful for somebody who wants to get started but doesn't really know what to do. And then the third thing is, it actually turns out that the men's groups that kind of get legs and keep going are not necessarily led by the person who's like got the degree in theology or is like a super Bible scholar or something. That's not the leader of the group. Of the men's groups that kind of have legs are the ones who just keep things organized. He said, "Hey guys, we're meeting next week. Don't forget." And call the parish and say, "Can we have the classroom or wherever it is?" And just the person who just kind of keeps it going and isn't necessarily the person who's the pontificator, right? The person who's the all it needs is somebody who's willing to make a space for it to happen, and that's hospitality, right? And lots of guys can do that. Like anybody can do that. And so get together if you want a program or if you want some help. You can call our office. We'll help you. You can go to the website. But the most important thing is like don't feel like you're underqualified. Like it's better to do it than to not do it.
Right. Father Andrew, with the last minute that we have here, 30 seconds, any other encouragement you want to offer to somebody who's thinking about joining a group or starting one?
I think I would say the just do it, especially if the vast majority of our brothers don't have the space, even if we're faithful to going to Mass on Sunday, we don't have the space to have these kinds of conversations that can help be very reassuring for the walk of faith. So it would be just do it. And then with this whole conversation today, re-emphasizing that it's a process and it's okay. Let's have patience with ourselves, but let's also be committed to growing in holiness, whether that's with chastity, whether that's with holy friendships and with growing in virtue. And to also, I guess I should say this, you guys didn't, if you're going to join a men's group, check with your wife. And make sure.
She'll help you.
Because we keep that vocation central because that's the mode of holiness that the Lord has desired for each of you, for me as a priest. And so anything that we do serves that vocation. If it's not serving that, it's not making that better and then making us better fathers or whatever the Lord has in our lives, then it's okay if it's not him.
Wonderful. Well, Father Andrew, thank you for tying this whole thing together quite beautifully for us. Chris, thank you so much for joining me again on the show. God bless you guys and the work that you continue to do. And thank you all for watching us and checking us out on WLAE. If you want more information about men's groups or about the men's conference that's been going on throughout this year, please check out nolacatholicmen.com. If you want to find out more about the work that we do here at Faith in Marriage, please check us out at faithinmarriage.org. You can sign up for an upcoming marriage retreat. You can read our blog, or you can check out my podcast, Always Hope. It's all there at faithinmarriage.org. So God bless everybody, and be good.